Third stuff and review Drive My Car. Japanese movie that's also up for Best Picture this year. This movie was like Parallel Mothers, and at first it was really boring. And I was just kind of thinking, like, when's it gonna get good? But then I realized later on, like, oh no, this is the good stuff. I just didn't realize it at first. It was kind of, it kind of made me think of this quote, and I don't even remember the quote exactly, or who said it for that matter. But the quote is something like, there's two types of movies. There's ones that are directed by Stanley Kubrick, and then there's everything else. And obviously this movie wasn't directed by Stanley Kubrick, because he's dead. But I feel like since his death, every once in a while, a movie comes out that really reminds me of his films. Like as if certain creators are kind of trying to fill a void that he left. Not that he ever made movies nearly often enough. In his particular style, he would often develop films over the course of years instead of just months like any other director might. Stanley Kubrick's movies almost all had this quality that the first time I watched them, I heavily disliked them, but at the same time, I kept thinking about them, and enough that I would come back to them in like a week, and then maybe a month after that, and then another month or 2 months, and just I'd keep coming back to the movies until, after watching them enough times, I eventually started to like them. I started to see beyond the surface level of the movie, because that's what it is for all of his movies, that there's like a surface level story, and then there's like layers underneath that. And, like, it's all very deliberate. It's a very deliberate style with a very, very specific pacing for each of his movies. Like, it's a kind of a different pace for each one, but it's usually very slow. Except when it's very quick. But that's usually just, like it's these very slow scenes that are suddenly broken up by these incredibly quick scenes. Well, like, with multiple viewings, it kind of becomes about different things every time you watch each movie, too. In that it's like the symbolism of it all, like you can interpret each symbol in each film of each scene. In each scene of each film, each symbol can be interpreted in like a multitude of ways, and that's kind of the beauty of his movies, and I think he knew that. I mean, he definitely knew that, because he would never explain any of his movies to anybody, because he wanted people to interpret them for themselves, Like, what does the ending of The Shining mean? That Jack's suddenly at a ball in July 1921 or whatever the year was. A lot of people have made a lot of theories about that, but no one really knows for certain. And no one ever will, because he didn't talk about what his movies meant. But they were also like dripping in subtlety. Like drenched in it, actually. That was another thing, like each scene was so subtle about what it's really about, almost. Like, what does this really mean? And it's like, because everything is so subtle and no one's ever saying directly what they mean, almost never. It's always kind of questioning the character's motives, and like, why are they doing this in this way, and why did they say that in this way, and like, just over and over again until like you're just discombobulated. But it's also like saying so many of these different messages in a very subtle way that's up for interpretation, that the movie's constantly becoming about something else, and each time you watch it, you could like consider a different interpretation, and it becomes that for that viewing, next time do a totally different interpretation, and becomes that for that viewing. And one of the reasons I think that Stanley Kubrick's films, they slowly grow on you, is that he built worlds, basically, and you became a part of that world for like 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours, or an hour if it's just like Fear and Desire or whatever. But he did that with atmosphere, and he did that with these deliberate set designs, or these deliberate camera motions. But everything was so deliberate and so perfected in its own way. Perfect. He made perfect films because he was such a perfectionist that he just wouldn't let go until he got the shot that he wanted. Guy kind of just ranting about Kubrick. Again, he's the best. But this really started. Especially after that first 45 minutes where I was bored and kind of like, I don't get it. This really started to remind me of a Kubrick movie. The only thing about it that I would say isn't a very Kubrickian thing is that it's about a very simple thing. Like overall the story's about this man who loses his wife, and she was cheating on him, but he never let her know that he knew that she was cheating on him. And then she died suddenly. And that's the first 45 minutes. And I was just like, okay, let's see where this is going, but I'm already bored. I'm already bored out of my mind. But then I don't know. Maybe partly because, like, that's when the plot really started moving. Like, jumps to 2 years later, and he's still in grief. And it's kind of about him and this driver that they assign him to. Like, they slowly become friends, but they're friends in their grief, because they're both, like, grieving souls that seem a little lost in this world and maybe need each other, but don't really know how to help the other person at the same time. But it's mostly a film about grief. There's also a play within a play, which had, like, you know, kind of parallels to what was happening in the real world to what was happening in this play. That's not, like, a new motif, but it works for this film, like, very well, actually. But, like, again, it's like a Kubrick movie. It's like everything is kind of dripping in subtlety, and no one ever really comes out and just says what they mean until the very end. Or near the end, like, then him and this girl can finally, like, talk a little more openly, but it still feels like there's something about their relationship that's very strained, just because they both have so much remorse from their past and whatnot. But that's probably the major difference, because all of Kubrick's movies were always about really complicated things. Except for maybe Killer's Kiss. That's probably the only one. That one's more like just like kind of a gritty noir film. I mean, it's still good, or good enough for an hour-long movie, but definitely much more simple story than anything else that Stanley Kubrick's ever did. Like, that was probably his one, like, just a noir movie. Nothing too complex here. Then again, maybe I just haven't seen it enough and haven't seen those subtle hints yet. Anyway, this movie was great by the end. Even though it was about those simpler things, and, like, much like Parallel Mothers, it just seemed like a movie that I would not enjoy just on the surface, or, like, just reading the synopsis or whatever. It's like, okay, it's about grief and melodrama and all that crap, but it wasn't really. I mean, it was about grief, but it wasn't melodramatic. Just the normal dramatic. And it was like everything was very deliberate, or it felt that way, like deliberately shot. And the shots were beautiful. The cinematography in this is absolutely amazing, especially since it's showcasing very interesting scenery throughout this city. Oh, and the city it mostly takes place in is Hiroshima, which I thought was kind of neat too. Just because that city was bombed in World War II. One of the only nuclear weapons used in war was dropped on that city and totally wrecked the entire city. But they rebuilt, you know. So like the whole city is kind of a metaphor for rebirth. And that's kind of what this whole, you know, movie was about. You know, this is a very well done film. It's one of those movies that's, well, it's 3 hours long, and it has such a deliberately slow pace that it definitely feels its length. But everything about it is so deliberate and subtle that it's like, it just draws you in and pulls you into its kind of mysterious feeling vibes, I guess. It was really something else. Not quite a Kubrick movie, but almost that. But yeah, I'll just say 10 out of 10. It was something special. Very different, very unique. Very slow paced, but in a good way, I think. But yeah, if you like dramas and don't mind reading subtitles, this was really amazing. 10 out of 10. Like and subscribe. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.